Good evening and welcome to this special Island Stats Sports Talk. I'm joined by none other than Jerry Swan, Don Arena, Mike Charles, and Vance Kemble. We do expect more. We're going to talk or remember the life of Earl Gabby Hart. He was one who touched on many people's lives in sport, out of sport, every day of living. He always had something encouraging to say to you, uplift you, and just kind of steer you in the right direction. I'm going to start, obviously, with Ms. Rena. The Bermuda National Athletic Association earlier today put together a press release looking back at his contributions to what he done for sport in general, but most importantly for the Bermuda National Athletic Association, formerly the Bermuda Track and Field Association. But can you give us just an insight on the press release regarding Earl Gabby Hart?
Well, Earl, for us, Gabby was one of the founder members of the Bermuda Track and Field Association. So there's no way we could have left his death and not said anything at all about Mr. Hart. And as people know him as Gabby, but of course I called him Mr. Hart. I was a young athlete when the Bermuda Track and Field Association was formed, which included Mr. Benjamin, Clive Long, Charles Jeffers, was quite a few other people. But I always remember Mr. Hart's enthusiasm. I remember him at Carifta games when we all were competing. Whenever a Bermudian athlete went on that field, Mr. Hart was jumping up and down. He was always there to support us, right up until I guess the last event that we had, any event that we had, Mr. Hart was one of our VIPs, and he came to everything. He supported everything. I had a conversation with Mr. Hart when I became president. He gave me some tips, some things that I needed to know, and any history that you needed to know about Bermuda Track and Field Association, you could go to Gabby Hart and he will give you that information. So he was a wealth of information for this sport. I know he is involved in other sports, but when we talk about track and field, Mr. Hart was one of our main supporters. He was with us for the development of this sport. Mr. Hart was there, and as I said, whatever meets we had, area permit meet, national championships, of course, the Carifta Games. He was there when we had the international race weekend, Front Street Mile. Mr. Hart was sitting up in the VIP. He showed up for every single thing that we invited him to, and he will be a miss.
Mm. Reflecting on some of the things that Ms. Rena has said, Mr. Swan, obviously you grew a good friendship with Mr. Hart over the years, but give us your first recollection of Mr. Hart.
Let me think. I guess it goes back to 1970. That's when I started teaching, and my first teaching post was at the Barclay Institute, and there were two teachers, both Bermudians, both males, to whom I became professionally attached and certainly would consult and talk and have discussions on occasions. And they were the late Mr. Randy Benjamin and now the late Earl Gabby Hart. So I had sort of contact with them. I think Randy at that time was teaching at Salters Grammar. Hart, I used to refer to him as Hart. I don't recall any time that I called him Gabby. Maybe I was more junior to the other people who called him Gabby. I usually refer to him as Hart or Earl, or on certain occasions, depending who was there, Mr. Hart. But in addressing him as Hart or Earl, it was always with respect. There wasn't any disrespect attached to that. So I remember him at Robert Crawford, and Robert Crawford always seemed to be formidable as a foe in inter-school sports. And when I say inter-school sports, I use that in a generic way, whether it be football or cricket or track and field. And I believe at one period, Hart had people like Clyde Best, Jimmy Parsons, Dirk Simmons. If you can imagine those guys playing for Robert Crawford at that time. And I think at one time when Barkley played them at Frog Lane, probably some people listening may not even know about Frog Lane. Many people will, but there's some who don't know Frog Lane or the history to it or what it is now called, etc. But I remember the game was played at Frog Lane. I think Robert Crawford put something like 7 or 9 goals in us. And it seemed like every few minutes I was scratching my head. And Robert True, I think, who was our goalkeeper, I think he spent more time picking the ball out the back of the net than making saves. But he was always encouraging people. If you were on a losing side, he'd find something to say that was encouraging or complimentary. And we didn't always necessarily agree. We respectfully disagreed and gave our viewpoints. Some occasions he won out, a few occasions, maybe fewer occasions I won out. But we had this, I think we had this very respectful relationship that started in teaching, and sort of being involved with track and field dovetailed into that, because the Track and Field Association was formed in the very early 1970s, I think in the 1970s. And the Track and Field Association wasn't the original national governing body. The original national governing body was with BAA, but it was felt by folks like Earl and Randy and myself that maybe BAA at that time wasn't doing enough to develop track and field. So in some quarters, we were regarded as upstarts. And submission was made to the IAAF. And after a while, not long after that, the Bermuda Track and Field Association came into being and was recognized as the national governing body in Bermuda. And of course, there's only one national governing body in any one country. And so that's how the sort of early beginnings started with the National Track and Field. As Donna said, Earl was one of the founding members. I'm not going to attempt to name all of them because I could miss one of 2, and then there could be some grief to that as well. So yeah. I'll just mention Earl, along with Randy Benjamin, who was the first president of the Bermuda Track and Field Association, were amongst the founding members. Sort of in the early years, we used to have our meetings at Robert Crawford School. Then we also had meetings at what was then the National Stadium Pavilion, our executive meetings. And then in the early 1970s, Bacardi liked what we were doing in terms of trying to develop the sport. So they supported track and field, and to the point where they allowed their premises to be used to hold the executive meetings, et cetera. So Earl, I see your facial expression there. There were occasions when maybe liquid libations may have been offered. I chose orange juice and ginger ale. Yeah. But so out of that, so Earl was very instrumental. He was keen to see young people improve. He was keen to see the best come out of them, regardless of where they came from. He was just keen to do that. But in all of his encouragement to youngsters, he also stood on principles, what he believed was principle, what was right, what was wrong. In 1972, I was competing then. I was much younger. I'm still young, but I was much younger then than I am now. You might say I was close to 50 years younger at that time than I am now. And I remember there was trying to qualify for the Olympic Games that were held in Munich that year, 1972. And the association, with Earl very much involved with that brought in a couple of triple jumpers. I was a triple jumper. Timothy Barrett from Bahamas, Henry Jackson of Jamaica, and at that time Henry was, I think, living in California, had been a student at USC, and they came in. The short version is I came up a little short of the qualifying standard. Earl felt that I, along with a few other athletes, should have been selected by the BOE to represent Bermuda at the Clifton Games. So I'm getting at the point here where he wasn't afraid to express his view publicly. And he wrote a letter, open letter to the paper, expressing his views that people like myself should have been selected. I came up about maybe 5 inches short of the qualifying standard in the triple jump that particular year. I was disappointed and not making the standard. In fact, I have a picture, Earl, going back to 1972 that features Earl, Gabby, Hart. Maybe I can show it to you. So if you don't mind, I'll hold it up. It's along with Timothy Barrett. This is Timothy Barrett here. Mm-hmm. And of course, Henry Jackson and Timothy Barrett, who became a doctor later on. They were the two triple jumpers who came in. Both were sort of 50-foot plus triple jumpers. But Earl wrote a letter strongly encouraging that I be selected. There was one person in the BOA who came out after his letter had been written and after the BOA had made a decision not to select myself or anyone else, at least certainly not me, who came out and said athletes should have been selected. And of course, Earl wrote another letter and basically criticized the gentleman for not taking this stand when it was most important. So he was not afraid to express his view on matters that he felt were right and just and for progress, really.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of the background to the history.
Right. Sure.
And I can come back with some other things and maybe a little later.
Let's bring in Mr. Charles. Mr. Charles, obviously, you've known Mr. Hart for quite some time. And just his manner of the way he handled things, what impressed you the most?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I came to Bermuda in 1975 as a teacher and got involved with track and field and met at that time Earl, Clive Long, Randy Benjamin, and all these gentlemen were in track and field. And having a little experience in track and field myself, I joined with the crew. But my recollection of Earl mainly is to do with, and I, as you know, in my job as a trade unionist, is remembering him in that light. He was a man of principle. He encouraged, as was said before, he encouraged everyone to stand firm, to do what you know is best. And I enjoyed his company very much. We traveled a lot together because in representing the Bermuda Union of Teachers, we traveled to the Caribbean quite a bit. And Earl was a character, as everybody knows. But when Earl reaches to any island in the Caribbean, he picks up the phone and he makes a call, and you don't see him anymore. He had friends, and we've been receiving lots of calls. We've received calls and messages from throughout the Caribbean, sending sympathies to the union here on his behalf. Early Sunday, because I got the call Sunday evening about his passing, and I got a call sometime around 7:30 Monday morning from St. Lucia with condolences for his passing. And since then, we received sympathies from Jamaica, Dominica, Barbados, everywhere. So, you know, he has been a man of Bermuda. He's been a man of the Caribbean. Um, Actually, as I said before, he was so involved with the BUT and with our involvement in the Caribbean Union of Teachers that he was the official elections commissioner when we had our annual general meetings in the Caribbean. Everyone looked forward to him to conduct the elections because no one else could do it as well. And we feel so strongly about him that our boardroom has been named the Earl E.A. Hart boardroom for many years now because he has been a trustee of the union, and we he will be a terrible miss because he was one of the persons who, in my office, if was having a problem, even after his retirement, I could call on him and ask for advice. He would usually call the office on a regular basis before his his semi-retirement when he didn't come out as much. Before that, he would come to the office almost daily, read the papers, give me every story in the papers while I was trying to do my work. But he would keep me informed. And really, what I really enjoyed with him is the fact that he he always kept abreast of everything that went on, whether it was locally or whether it was internationally. And he was someone that we as the BUT are going to miss tremendously. You know, I know that sporting wise, he was a man of the people. Union wise, I can also say that we are going to miss him and miss his advice and his input from time to time.
Yeah. Mr. Campbell, good evening. Not just as a person or the president of Young Men's Social Club, but you've known Mr. Hart for quite some time as well. What impact has he made on you personally that you can actually date us back to?
Well, I can go back to school football. That's when I first met Mr. Hart. I didn't know him at the time, and you know, at the end of the game, we were playing against the school that he coached, and he said, "Mr. Campbell, you know, you'll be a better player if you did this and if you did that. It will help your game tremendously." And I looked at my mates and I said, "Who's that guy? And how does he know my name, right?" And the fact that he took time out to learn something about the other players, the other team players, said a lot to me about what he was about, and the advice that he was giving wasn't just at that one game. So whenever we played against his team, there was some advice, and he didn't have to do that. So that is what, you know, that was my introduction to Mr. Hart. And you know, in answer to that question as to who he was and who is this guy over there giving me advice, the answer came back, that's Earl Gabby Hart. You don't know him? He was a great footballer in his day, a great sportsman in his day. And so I took that to heart and I listened to the advice. And I think because of people like him who invested in young men like myself, you know, I was able to excel in football and utilize football to help pay for my education. But he had that distinctive voice as well. So when he spoke, you knew it was him. You didn't have to look. You knew it was Mr. Hart, and you paid attention.
I was just going to say that because I've been to places and his voice stands out, and I'm pretty sure, Donna, we were in Bahamas at the Carifta Games, and we knew when he was there because you would hear that distinctive voice. And I think a lot of people throughout the Caribbean were always looking for that or listening for that voice because of what he brought to the athletes, to the atmosphere, to everything. but reflecting on what he was able to, what advice he gave you once you became the president. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Well, as everyone has said, Mr. Hart stood on principle. So he talked about how I present myself. He talked about even how I dressed. If I was attending a meeting, if I was attending a NECAC meeting, or if I was attending a international, athletics association meeting, he talked about presenting yourself and making sure that you present yourself in a way that you gain that respect from the very beginning. So that was one of the things that he talked to me about. When we were looking at having Carifta here, he reminded me of how great it was in 1980 and how great it was in 1975. And if we're going to have it, we have to live up to that expectation. So, and it was always, it's interesting that we talked about everybody talked about how he stood in principle, because a lot of times he would even say to me, well, that athlete down there, don't you think he should have his shirt tucked in, which was similar to Jerry Swan as well. um don't you think this athlete should have his shirt tucked in? He looks a bit untidy. And so he was very much on principle. And when you saw Mr. Hart, you had to say good morning. He was very, very much into structure, into these are the things that you should and you shouldn't do. So if any time he saw, even when we had when we had the receptions at Bacardi, he would say to me before we go in, are you ready? Because I know you will speak. Are you ready? You have something prepared? And so I said, yes, Mr. Hart, I have something prepared. I'm not just going to stand up and just babble on. So he was really a person on principle, and also how you presented yourself. So we talked a lot about that. And again, as I said, he told me a lot about the history. You're now the president. These are the things that happened before you, and these are the things that you need to know. These are kind of the expectations. So even sometimes just sitting down Front Street at the Front Street Mile, sometimes you sit down with Mr. Hart, and he'll tell me how International Race Weekend started. So don't think that you bought this here, because this is how it started. So he was always telling me and making sure that um I'm aware, or was aware of how things got started. It's like, okay, you didn't start this. This is how it got started. Okay, Mr. Hart, I got it. I got it. I got a long list of people before me. So, so he always made sure that I knew and I remembered that, this is the work that was put in before I got to this point. So
Yeah.
yeah, he was awesome. He was
Yes.
awesome.
I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Swan, but I am awaiting the NACAC president, Mike Sands, to join us. So I might interrupt because he's only got a few minutes.
Oh, you know what, Earl? He just called me on my phone. I was like, why is Mike calling me? And I hung up on him. So I'll call him back.
He's in transit,
Okay.
but he's
I'll
going to
call him
jump
right
in.
back.
So I might have to interrupt you because
Okay,
he just
not a
wanted to come
problem.
on for a minute or two.
I'll call him right back, Earl.
Okay, all right. Mr. Swan, hearing everything and hearing what you had to say about Mr. Hart, obviously, in several ways, that start that he was standing up for you, in pushing you because you were just shy of what he felt was something that he should stand up for. Did that kind of help you in your way of teaching and coaching after that?
Let me just say, let me go back to a point that Donna just made in terms of dress and presentation. Earl, Randy Benjamin, Randy Horton, and I, along with other teachers, particularly teachers of physical education, we attended college in the UK. And when you went to teacher training college, there were certain standards, and that included dress, how you dress for PE, how you dress when you taught in the classroom. So if I taught cricket in a practical session and during my teaching practice, I had to be dressed in all whites with my sweater, blue college sweater that I'm teaching. If I was teaching gymnastics, I had to be dressed or in a gymnastic attire. And if I had a maths class to teach, which I did sometimes on teaching practice, I had to be dressed in shirt, tie, jacket. So dress was part of what was called standard, appropriate, professional presentation. And teaching PE was no exception. So that spilled over. So we all kept that sort of similar background. I can't ever recall talking about I taught in a t-shirt. I taught Donna Barkley. I don't think Donna can ever recall on any occasion where I wore a t-shirt and taught.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you dressed appropriately, even in PE. You wore a tennis shirt that had a collar, a tracksuit. So those things were sort of part of what we were taught in becoming a teacher of physical education or a teacher, period. No matter what level you taught at, primary school or high school. We didn't have middle school, you know, back then. But in terms of a point, another point that was made earlier, Earl liked giving credit to people. I was talking to Brian Wellman. Brian is one of the athletes I coach. Brian's was a world-class athlete. Even people in the IAAF knew Brian Wellman. If I was at a meet, an IAAF World Championships, IAAF World Junior Championships, invariably it meant going to the technical room to pick up information about the heats, competition, whatever. Somebody from the IAAF would see me and ask, well, how is Brian Wellman? How is Nicky Saunders? These guys were well known. They were world-class athletes. And Brian remarked something to me a few evenings ago. He's the one who broke the news to me that Earl had passed. And Brian told me what Earl used to call him, refer to him. Never, very seldom referred to him as Brian, but called him my world champion. He was proud of what Brian achieved. And he wanted to and that was his way of letting Brian know that he not only was he proud when he did it, but he continues to be proud because that cannot be changed. You know, he will always be a gold medal winner and a world indoor champion. So he took a great pride in sharing in the achievements and the joy and complimenting, you know, other people. I got out of teaching in 1981. I started in 1970. Spent a few years during the decade of the 1970s, completing my bachelor's degree and then achieving my master's degree. Got out of teaching in 81, but two gentlemen were responsible for me getting back into teaching. And they were Randy Benjamin and Earl Hart. Those names sound familiar to you?
Yeah.
You know, they felt being out of teaching was a loss to the educational system. And that was I thought that was a nice compliment from two guys, two gentlemen I respected immensely. And I guess who could recognize the quality in a person, certainly when it came to teaching and the contribution that, you know, they could make. If you look at Warwick Sec, where Earl Hart was deputy principal, and you think of the athletes that came out of Warwick Sec when he was there, Brian Wellman was a former student of Earl Hart. You had Stephen Woodley. Donald may recall Stephen Woodley. Rohan Simons, Devon Bean, Tariq Huey, and others. But those names I just called all represented Bermuda Carifta Games, and all of them earned medals at Carifta Game. And they were students, former students of Warwick Sec, where Earl Hart was the deputy principal. Now, he may not have taught each person in the particular topic in PE, but he certainly would have taught them either in maths or some other subject. And as deputy, he would have been hands-on with just about every student at the school. He was supportive as a deputy principal. I know he encouraged me, for example, to be involved with the maths committee at that time. So he encouraged me to come along, be involved with the maths committee who assessed the examinations and evaluate the maths exam on the BSSC, etc. But he enjoyed life. I won't go into too much detail about that, but he was a people person. As
Yes.
already been mentioned by one or two speakers, he enjoyed life. He enjoyed the company of others. And he knew how to relax as well, apart
Yes.
from encouraging, being stern, letting you know, as Donna said, you didn't start this. This is what you have to keep up. This is what
Right.
the standard. And in talking about that, Earl was instrumental in the organizing committee of the Bermuda Track and Field Association when Bermuda, for the first time, hosted the Carifta Games in 1975.
Yes. Yes.
He was on the organizing committee and played an important role, leadership role in that. And
Can I just interrupt you for 1 sec, because I've got Mr. Sands on, and I know he's on his way to another meeting, so I don't want to miss this opportunity. Good evening, Mr. President, Mr. Mike Sands, President of NACAC. How are you this evening?
I'm very well. Are you hearing me? Good evening.
Yes,
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
good
you.
evening. Good evening. Good evening, Bermuda. Good evening to Donna and the Bermuda Track and Field Association. I must acknowledge my members, and it's a pleasure for me to be here, and thanks for inviting me, though on a very sad occasion. And I just want to express my condolences to the Bermuda people in general and the Bermuda sporting fraternity. I was listening to the caller previously, and he started to reference the fact that Gabby was a part of the Bermuda hosting the first Grift Games. I think it was in 1975. What I really want to say to that effect is that I came into the sport in the early 70s. I don't want to date myself, but when I came into the sport, Gabby was a part of the sport, and I too can testify to his love for the sport and his strict adherence to the rules, regulations, and what he meant in terms of wanting to build the sport, not just track and field, but I think he wanted to build young people, young men, to be productive citizens. He always had a good word of advice. I think the last time I was able to communicate with him, I think was in 2013 or thereabouts when we had Carifta here in the Bahamas. I think it was. I think he came down to Carifta, and we were able to have a very nice chat. I think he's going to be sorely missed by the Bermuda community and the sporting community at large. And I just wanted to drop in for a minute to express my condolences on my own personal behalf, but also on behalf of the NACAC family, where, we will surely miss his wise counsel. And so I would like to leave a word of advice to the young people that he mentored to take, counsel to his years, because he meant nothing except the good for all of us that came in contact with him. And so again, I just want to express my condolences on his passing.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Mr. Sands, Mr. President. We do appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, and we look forward to being able to speak with you further in much better times, of course.
Thank you. Just for the record, you could call me Mike, but also speaking of Mike, if you permit me, I see there's another Mike sitting there, and I said I don't want to date myself, but I have to say this with your permission. That Mike sitting there that's smiling, he was one of my teachers when I was in high school in New York. Now, I'll leave that for you all to discuss it another time.
Well, I tell you what, you may not want to leave because he might
you've already dated yourself.
The other Mike.
And it's also good to see my dear friend Jerry Swan. So I just want to take this opportunity. I mean, I know it's a sad occasion for us, but at the end of the day, I would like to say, let us all let fond memories of Gabby comfort us all during these difficult periods of bereavement. So those are my words that I'd like to leave with you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Be well,
Yeah.
Mike.
Thank
Good seeing you.
Happy New
Okay,
Year.
yes, Mr. Charles. Good to see you. Y'all take care. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, there you have it from the NACAC president. When I reached out to him, he was very much wanting to come on, he did express to me that he was going to be racing out to a meeting at the precise time. But he did want to come on, and I just wanted to make sure that he had his opportunity to have a say. We'll let you continue, Mr. Swan.
Okay, well, I have to think where I left. All right.
He was one of the founding members in 1975.
1975, yeah, Bermuda for the first time hosted Carifta Games. And at that time, we had a grass track, 400-meter grass track. There was no synthetic track. There was, I think, the only competition venue that had some sort of synthetic surface was for the horizontal jumps. It had some sort of synthetic runway, which was right in front of the National Stadium Pavilion. We had a pavilion there. We didn't have seats. We had a natural sort of embankment amphitheater where people sat and watched it. And Earl was instrumental in all of that. Earl, along with other people, made our first hosting of the Carifta Games successful. And to the extent, Bermuda won more medals than Jamaica that year. Right? In fact, Earl and Randy and the executive that time organized track and field so well, or athletics generally so well in Bermuda, that other countries, including Bahamas, where Mike Sands is from, kind of, asked about the template for doing that. And so there were a couple of other countries who followed the template Bermuda used to help develop the sport. You know, the template that people like Randy, Earl, Charles, and a few others on that first committee, founding committee for track and field. He, that was already stated, whatever Earl involved himself with, he committed himself to it. Whether it was teaching, whether it was in an administrative capacity or a representative capacity, representing a club or governing body at another entity or higher level association, whether it be NECAC or CACAC. He took pride in what he did. He took pride in the responsibility that he carried when he carried that flag of representation, for that body. And ever mindful that he's a Bermudian and wanted to be seen to be doing good work as a Bermudian and for Bermuda.
And just to jump in real quick, because Jerry said something that kind of jogged my memory. When we talk about how proud he was, I remember when we had the Front Street Mile, when we had the permit meet, or we had Carifta, and I went to Mr. Hart and I said, Mr. Hart, we would like for you to present a medal, present the medals. I mean, his chest used to be, I could just see him walk into the podium right now. His chest was out. He was so proud. It was like he marched to the podium. And when he got there, he was so official. He did everything. He told the person where they had to stand, how they had to hand him the medal. And when Jerry was told, I just remembered one of the Front Street Miles. It was so funny because the young person just kept, oh no, you have to stand up. You've got to put your head down, receive your medal. He said, it was just so funny. But like Jerry said, everything he did, he was so proud. I mean, soon as I said to him, oh, Mr. Hart, we need you to give out a medal, his chest went up and he stood up and he just like he marched to the podium. And that's why I said he was all about hope and circumstance. He just had it all down to a T, and he made sure that everybody around him did whatever they're supposed to do correctly. He'll tell the girls, okay, you got to stand up straight, present it, hand it to me. He was definitely all about everything had to be done right.
Yeah,
he was a spirit peacock on occasions.
Yeah. Mr. Charles, Mr. Hart was one of those what one would call an historian. He remembered so many different things, and no matter what topic it was on, he had some form of recollection of it. Through the BUT and through your time at the BTFA. How did that influence a lot of decision making when it came down to whether it was going to be the right decision or the best decision?
Well, I'm glad you stressed on that point. Um, he was an educator. He believed in education. Uh, he was, besides teaching phys ed, physical education, he taught math. Uh, he was a deputy principal at Warwick Secondary School for a while, and he was really interested in the students. He was part of the BSSC committee at one time, and he has always insisted that any exam that came after that was watered down. He was he was an education uh, educator in the best sense of the word, and he was a member of our executive committee, and he insisted that everything that was done properly, had to be done exactly as the Constitution outlined. And he, even after being on the executive, once he retired, we insisted that he be a trustee simply because he had been so faithful in upholding the Constitution and our union. He was always interested in moving the union forward. When we traveled, he was very proud of his Bermuda, and he made sure that everyone in the Caribbean knew where he was from, what Bermuda did, and what Bermuda was responsible for. And he's going to be a real myth. We, as I said, I remembered when, and he never gave up. That's one of the things that was so important. When he retired from teaching, and this is, I guess, a union matter, but however, um, he retired on a teacher's salary. But he insisted, and it took us years, but we finally won that battle. He insisted that he was a deputy principal when he retired, and therefore he should not retire on a teacher's salary. It took years, many years after he retired, but we scored a victory on that. And I think he would have always been proud of that. And simply because, and he kept me going because every now and then he would say, Mike, what about that thing? You know, I what he meant about that thing. And we both kept on until now everybody can reap that benefit that he fought so hard for. And that was the kind of individual that he was. He kept us all in line. He kept us all. Anytime made a decision, we said, we have to be sure that that Earl is okay with this. Otherwise, we're gonna have to explain it to him. And as a trustee, he kept us because trustees are the ones who have ownership of the material parts of the union. So we had to make sure that Earl was satisfied with everything we did. And I must say that we owe a lot in this union to his stewardship.
Well, I know, Mr. Campbell, you hear these guys talking about how proud he was of Bermuda and letting everybody know about Bermuda. He was just as proud as Social Club to that fact as well. Ain't that true?
Well, we consider his passing a major loss from the perspective that he is the epitome of the type of young men and young women that we are trying to develop at Young Men's Social Club. And what I mean by that is someone who reaches their full potential in the sport or sports of their choice, one who reaches their full potential in the classroom, one who reaches their full potential in their job, in the profession of their choice, and one who gives back to their community. And he was the epitome of all of that. And so we consider this a great loss for the club and for Bermuda. Um, as far as he played cricket for the club, he also dabbled in some table tennis, and he played football for the club. Uh, um, I was made to understand that he played three positions on the football team during the teams of the late 50s and early 60s, which were, that was our heyday so far on the footballing side, in which we won five league titles in a row. And he played goalkeeper,
Mm-hmm.
center forward, and center half,
Mm-hmm.
and also played for the cricket team, as I mentioned. So, you know, he was involved off the field. He was involved in the management of the club. He served on many committees. He also was the club rep to the BFA and the cricket board. So he was quite involved in giving back to his club off the field as well as on the field. And, I think he tried to pass that drive and that determination to exceed expectations and set new limits when you reach goals that you had set new goals for yourself. He is the epitome of that, and that's the type of young man and young women that we are trying to develop at Young Man Social Club. So he is definitely a major loss. He's also an honorary member, which there aren't too many of those at Young Men Social Club. So we hold him in high esteem.
Mm. Donna, a man of much words and wisdom. As you've already stated, he was, always on. But when it comes to rules and regulations, because obviously as a founding member of the BTFA and over the years things change, but he would always take you back to how things got started, as well as, where they are today. What will you miss mostly about Mr. Hart?
Well, as I said, I'm definitely gonna miss. And again, I'll just use the example of when we have the event for the and I'm gonna still call it International Race Weekend because Triangle Challenge it's a little difficult for me. I
Yeah.
like International Race Weekend. He was always at the Bacardi event, and he always came to me, and he would say, Donna, you're doing a good job. We'll have a conversation, and he'll always say, do you have your speech ready, before you go up? And I used to always say, yes, Mr. Hart, I have it. I'm not going to just get up there and just talk off the top of my head because then I end up missing out sponsors and so on and so forth. So we always had that. And as I said, we always made sure Mr. Hart was on our VIP list always. I mean, and when I think about it now, there's just a few of them left. Mr. Gashard is no longer here. Mr. Benjamin's not here. Mr. Long's not here. We have my mom and we have Miss Smith, Bremen's mom, who was part of it, and Charles Jeffers. Those are the people that I remember. Debbie Jones's mama was one as well, and she's no longer with us. So I look at that executive when I was coming up as a track athlete, and it's starting to really dwindle. So if there came a time when we needed to know the history, it's really difficult now because there's few people that are left that was a part of when this whole thing started. So that's definitely one of the things that I am going to miss, because even if I talk and I say something incorrect, Mr. Hart would always say, you see, I keep saying Mr. Gashard because Mr.
Yes,
Gashard and I
yes.
were very, very close. But Mr. Hart would always come to me and say, oh, Donna, this was really the year that it happened. So he kept me on my P's and Q's whenever I was making any sort of presentation. I had to make sure that I had my dates correct,
Huh?
you know, distances, times, whatever correct. Because Mr. Hart will come to me afterwards and he would continually say, Donna, you forgot this is the year, or you forgot to say. So he definitely kept me on my P's and Q's all the time, and I totally appreciated it. And as I said, I also enjoyed watching how proud he was. I mean, like you said, when we were in Bahamas, when those athletes went on the starting line, Mr. Hart would always stand up his chest out. That's a Bermudian athlete getting ready to compete. He
Mhm.
was so much into Bermuda. He was so much into supporting, and I'll say my sport, because that's all I know is my sport. And he was, as I said, he was there whenever we called. I mean, we have other, past presidents and so on that we invite that they don't always come. Mr. Hart was always there. He never missed any event that we invited him to. Mr. Hart was there. And that was, again, thanks kind of to Freddie Evans and Gina Evans. They made sure that Mr. Hart, was in attendance at all of these events as well. But he, as I said, he was on our VIP list, and whatever event we have next is going to be sad that we now have to remove him off of the list. But
Mm,
yeah, I'm definitely gonna miss him because, as I said, he was always there.
yeah. Mr. Swan, what will you miss mostly?
I think the ease at which you could approach Earl and engage a conversation on just about anything. Um, we didn't see each other often in recent years, but on those occasions we happened to see each other or saw each other at the stadium, like at the national championships, there would invariably be a discussion. And sometimes that discussion could be on so deep that we might miss what was going on at the stadium. Or if I saw him in Hamilton, such has been the occasions, I've seen him outside of Butterfield Bank, and we sit on the steps and talk, and then I even forget where I was supposed to be going. Such was, the joy and the ease at which we were discussing different things. I'm looking at a picture here, and it goes back to, and this might bring memories back to Donna. It goes back to 19. Let me put my glasses on. This goes back to 1973. It was a picture taken by a photographer at the Bermuda Mid-Ocean News. And it features a series of pictures. One of those pictures shows, and this again reflects back to Earl and Randy and Charles and the other members of the executive committee back then. They brought in a number of athletes, always trying to provide better opportunities for the local athletes. And we had people like Donald Corey, if you remember Donald Corey.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Corey is a world-class sprinter. There's one picture of Cal Dill and Donald Corey at these 1973 championships in a dead heat at the National Stadium in the heat. There's also one picture, Donna, of you, same page, wearing glasses, wearing number 1112. You remember those days? But that was all sort of tied into.
I was say you're not going to show it.
I could if Earl wanted to. If you.
I'll probably never live it down, but you know what? Why not? Why not? You could show it.
This is all part of how Earl Hart was built, along with the other peoples who were like-minded and trying to provide good opportunities, good challenges for our athletes to improve. Carl Lawson, I know you remember Carl Lawson, world-class sprinter, were also here one year. And again, that was sort of in the 1970s. Invariably, these athletes would be brought in for our national championships. One point that hasn't been mentioned about Earl, he was involved with a educational fraternity. I'm going to say the name and hope I get it right. Phi Delta Kappa, did that sound right? I don't know, I could be wrong. But he was, I think, either president or local president of the local chapter. And he was interested in trying to uplift and enlighten teachers as well. So not just young folks in various sports or people generally. So, and it goes back to the point where he tried to have a really strong, positive impact on people. That was positive.
Yeah.
So, my takeaway is that, with Earl, I feel when upon reflection, I've benefited from that in some ways. Hopefully, I I complimented what his desire was in getting me back into teaching back in the late 1980s to the 1990s. But he was a proud Bermudian.
Mr. Charles?
Yes, I have to comment and give another comment on his love for education. In that, he was a well-rounded individual. When you listen to his when you listen to his sporting activities, and as he matured and he stopped being active in sports, I think he turned more to his other love, and that is education, and making sure that um, the students in his care were well looked after. He was always looking to, and it was just said, he was always looking to advance the cause of education later on, again, as I said, as he matured. Um, he was the local president of the chapter, and he brought in people to do professional development for teachers. He was instrumental in doing that. He always encouraged us as members of the Bermuda Union of Teachers to look after our teachers and to make sure that we have every once a year we have a conference, and he was always interested in making sure that these conferences were well subscribed and that we brought in particularly prominent people to do workshops. So Earl has lived a very productive life. And those of us who have had the privilege of being around him must be count ourselves as really being fortunate in being able to get his counsel, his wise counsel. And all in all, I must say that from a union perspective, we really appreciate his time. And overall, as a person, I think we can all, anyone who has been in his presence, know that this is someone who has the attributes of a good individual.
Yeah. Mr. Campbell?
Well, I did forget one thing that Mr. Hart did. He did also coach the football team at Young Men's Social Club. But I think if I had to remember Mr. Hart for one thing, it would be no matter what the arena, whether it be in the sports arena, education, or giving back to his community, pursuit of excellence, and his desire to instill that pursuit of excellence in others.
Well, I do want to say thank you to everyone this evening for taking this time out to reflect on Mr. Hart's time, the energy that he spent, the as we call it, blood, sweat, and tears for his loves of no matter what it was. When he was considered a teacher, those children were his children. When he was a deputy principal, they were his children. Track and field, they were his children. Football, wherever he went, he was always willing, whether you were on his team or not, he was always willing to give that advice. And the thing that I will leave everyone with is the fact that we carried the same first name. And of course, he was always one to give me that advice that, listen, you have my name and you need to know about our name. And You know, he never let me forget that, and you know, he would always give me words of encouragement, doing what I do. You know, he would always talk about, if you're gonna do it with passion, do it with pride. You know, and you know, Donna, when you said whenever he was called upon, you could see that the chest out, the voice. That will be the bigger things that we all miss about Mr. Hart, is that he was always one willing and able to give whatever advice was needed to comfort you and then put you on the right track. Now, whether or not you actually ended up on the right track is something different, but he was always there, no matter what, to give you that advice. So for that, we would all say, rest in peace, Earl Gabby Hart. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.